Welcome. You're listening to the 365 Firsts podcast, a show filled with stories of experiencing first times and all the fun, growth, unknowns, and excitement that go with them. It's also the place to get expert advice, motivation, and inspiration to get in on trying new things. And now, here's your host, the master of first times, and chick you're trying to keep up with, Ann Bernard.
Yes, indeed. I am the chick you want to keep up with and the voice you want in your head because I am the voice that tells you you can. Welcome to another episode of the 365 First podcast and Expert Advice Before Your First Time series. I am your host, Ann Bernard. Today's topic is something that is nowhere near talked about enough. Although, thankfully, it's a topic that is now more talked about than ever before, thanks to women like my guest expert, Dr. Karen Dunstan, aka the Conscious Menopause Boss. That's right, we are talking about menopause today. If you are a woman, it's going to happen to you in your lifetime. And if you're like me, it might creep up on you way before you expect it and freak you out a bit. For me, it started with night hot flashes, which I initially blamed on little man for sleeping too close to me and generating too much heat. I would wake up in the middle of the night in a sweat and look at him and get mad at him. So when I started having day hot flashes and then months without a period, I figured something was off and happening, and it wasn't on little man. I Googled the symptoms to find some answers, but was left less than satisfied with the information available. I know I'm not alone going through this, which is why I'm using the power of this podcast to introduce you to Dr. Karen Dunstan to provide you expert advice before your first time entering menopause. Karen is a holistic health expert, speaker, and health coach. She's moved beyond her career as a community OBGYN and holistic health practitioner and teaches women what it really means to heal, become optimally healthy, and thrive in life. She has remained a board-certified doctor since completing her residency, but has taken her clinical expertise beyond the exam room as a doctorpreneur and uses her passion for and expertise in wellness and health optimization to ignite women to action in corporate settings as the host of her Brilliant Health Radio podcast and serves women individually through her group virtual programs and one-on-one consulting and at her functional medicine practice in Atlanta, Georgia. All right, so without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, my guest today is Dr. Karen Dunstan. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me, Ann.
Yeah, so this is a weird, odd topic to cover. Except not really. I say that weird or not topic because it might not apply to all of the audience, but I think we should nail that in the butt right off the start, that just because you're not a woman I'm, like I shared in my story, I'm in my 40s, so I'm already starting to deal with being premenopausal, but this is a topic for everyone to educate themselves about. Don't you agree?
Absolutely, because even if you're a woman and you haven't gone through menopause, you're going to, or you have someone in your family or a loved one who's going to go through it, so you need to know about this.
Absolutely. Again, like I shared in my story, it didn't even occur to me at first that I was having symptoms of being premenopausal. So can you just give us an overview of what it means to go through menopause?
Yes, and actually that's one of the first YouTube videos that I did, was talking about what are the definitions around menopause, because there's a lot of confusion. And if you don't understand the definitions, then it can be even more confusing. So menses, that's the period, pause is the cessation. So technically it's the cessation of menses that occurs on average at the age of 51 in the United States when the ovaries have no more eggs. It's your eggs in the ovaries that produce the majority of your sex hormones. And so that means that, one, you're no longer fertile, and can't get pregnant, and two, that your sex hormone levels go down. And this comes along with a large range of symptoms that are often troublesome for women, in addition to not being able to get pregnant. And those changes actually start 5 to 10 or more years before the actual menopause. And so there's really a continuum. And now with our lifespan being about 82 years of age for women, if you consider that most of us start with the premenopausal and perimenopausal changes around the age of 40, you're really going to spend about half your lifetime in menopause or perimenopause. And so this is why it's so important to arm yourself with the proper knowledge about what's happening with your body and what you need to do at this time of life.
Okay, so if you're listening to this on the radio, you're not seeing my face. That's like, oh God, please no, come on. Are you serious? And obviously I have done some research, so I do understand this. And one of the many great wonders of being a woman. Can you talk a little bit about what the symptoms are? So if someone, like I said, when it first started happening to me, I had no clue that's what was happening. And since the show is about, right, so your first time, probably you're coming across this because you're pre-menopausal. What are the symptoms that women start experiencing that they should start thinking, okay, my body's starting to go through this process?
Yeah. So some of the first symptoms that people will notice are menstrual irregularities. Their period may start coming a little bit early, or more commonly a little bit late, and it can be a little longer and a little heavier. Those are some of the most common symptoms. But hot flashes are very common as well, maybe getting hot at night, or all of a sudden you're sitting there minding your own business at your desk, and whoop, it's like someone turned on the furnace, and it usually starts from your head and works its way down, and you just feel hot and diaphoretic, sweaty. And so those are some common symptoms. Fatigue, weight gain that isn't resolved by your usual measures, maybe upping your exercise and changing your diet. Those are some common symptoms. Difficulty sleeping, difficulty falling asleep, and difficulty staying asleep, and waking up not feeling rested. Fatigue in the mornings or also in the afternoons is very common. These can be accompanied by food cravings. You can have vaginal dryness, more frequent UTIs, urinary leakage, gastrointestinal symptoms can newly onset specifically because of the perimenopausal changes. So really these sex hormones affect all the cells in your body. So symptoms can come from any cells, any system, anywhere, and they often do. But some of the first symptoms are what we talked about.
Oh, wow. Okay. So if someone's listening and they're going, check, 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 this is happening to me, what should they be doing at this point?
Right. So really, because we don't talk about the menopause transition as much as we should in our culture, most women just think that, oh, it's impending menopause in the next 5 to 10 years. And really, they don't even know that they have a choice to not suffer. So if you're listening and this is you and you're check, 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 know that you do not have to suffer. And this is kind of propagated also in most gynecologists' office. Now, your gynecologist typically will give you drugs to control certain symptoms. Like if you say, I can't sleep, then they'll give you a sleeping pill. Or a lot of times they'll give you birth control pills or an antidepressant. But what's important to know is that these pharmaceuticals just control the symptom. They don't address the reason why you're having the symptom in the first place. That's why I practice something called functional medicine, which addresses the root cause of this. And you're starting to have these for many reasons, which we'll get into. But as the sex hormones decrease from the ovaries, like I said, all your cells and systems need these hormones. Hormones are messengers. That's what hormone means. And they carry information that starts in your brain to your endocrine organs to tell all your cells how to function. So really, the best way to address the symptoms that you're having is to go to the root, which is the hormonal deficiency, and make sure that you create what I call hormonal prosperity. So you're not operating from this deficit of hormones, but you're operating from a full bank account of hormones.
Okay, that is excellent information. Can you bring it down to a simpler understanding for me of, okay, well, what would be my first step to do that?
Sure. So the number one hormone that causes symptoms, usually when you start having perimenopausal symptoms around the age of 40 or in your 40s, is a progesterone deficit. Progesterone is the sex hormone that is weight loss, diuretic, sleep well, antidepressant, anti-anxiety hormone. It's the happy hormone. And so your levels start going down in your 40s. This is why we have an increased risk of estrogen dependent problems, because progesterone balances estrogen, and estrogen dependent problems can be endometriosis, fibroids, breast cancer. This is why they increase in the 40-year-old range. So most of the symptoms are as that progesterone starts going down. So one of the simplest things you can start doing is replacing that estrogen. So how can you do that? Number one, you can do it with herbs. There's an herb called Vitex. It's also called chaste tree. And taking that tells the ovaries, hey, step it up, you're not making enough progesterone. And oftentimes is enough to get someone kicked into where they're making enough progesterone. But sometimes it's not. And if it's not, then using an over-the-counter progesterone cream at mid-cycle to the end of your cycle oftentimes will correct the imbalance and really very beautifully alleviate those symptoms. There are other herbs too, like dong quai, black cohosh. They can help as well.
Do I just look those up online? And I just start taking them? Is there a recommended dosage? Should I get with someone like yourself to make sure that I'm doing this right? Or is this something that I can go about on my own?
Well, you can do it on your own. Most of the products that I've mentioned are readily available. I have on my website a portal into an online formulary that I use with my patients called Full Script, where you can get a good over-the-counter progesterone cream. There are combination herbal products made specifically for women in this phase of life that include blends of the herbs that I've discussed, and most of them will come with a recommended dosage. They'll say, 1 to 2 or 4 or whatever caps a day. And so you can do this yourself. Ideally, you'd be guided by someone like myself who practices functional medicine, but it's not always necessary. So there's a lot that you can do on your own.
Okay, so if I'm going to tackle this on my own, I'm going to guess, one, I should really know my body, my feelings, my emotions. Should I be keeping a journal, tracking all of this data, kind of like, to have the data that I need so I know what I'm doing is working or not working? What's your recommendation there on the approach?
Yeah, I think it's great to be as objective as you can, because sometimes if you just are feeling a certain way and you start doing a treatment and then you ask yourself a couple months later, am I really feeling different? But you really didn't put down anything objective. It's kind of hard because it's human nature that we forget where we were. And so writing down the symptoms you're having and maybe rating them on a scale of 1 to 5, like, oh, I'm feeling depressed. On a scale of 1 to 5, how depressed am I? Wow, I'm a 5. Or maybe you're anxious. On a scale of 1 to 5, maybe I'm just a 2. Weight gain, how many pounds had you gained? Write that down. How are you sleeping? If you're sleeping really well, then put that. If you're not, then put that. And be specific, and then maybe reassess it at 1, 2, and 3 month intervals. One thing that people have to remember is that herbs work gently with the body to guide them. They're not like pharmaceutical drugs that are like hammers that come in and boom, are very powerful and fast acting. So they can be a little slower onset and the changes can be more subtle over time. So don't look for fireworks in the
overnight. I feel better.
Right. Like I took this and I was great. So really, if you're going to make any of these changes, I would say give it a good 3 months to see how your body responds, and objectifying those changes by writing down and scaling the symptoms is a great idea.
Okay, awesome. Now, are there things that women can be doing that's going to be making this process worse?
Yeah, I'd say the number one thing. So one, it's about balancing your hormones. But somebody asked me yesterday, what's the one thing you would tell a perimenopausal woman who's starting to have symptoms to do? So before you even start addressing your hormones, one thing that you need to do is address your diet. Because if your diet has gone wrong, that definitely is something that's going to make your symptoms way, way worse. So you want to make sure that you're eating a whole food, predominantly plant-based. It doesn't have to be all plants. You can eat meat. Diet that's organic food and unprocessed. So you're eating it as close to how nature provided it as possible. And so if you eat what I call a clean diet, then your menopausal symptoms are generally going to be much less. So before you do anything else, cleaning up your diet, getting rid of the processed foods, the artificial colorings and flavorings, the pesticides in your food, getting rid of eating animal products that are not grass-fed, free-range, things like that. That's going to really do a lot to improve your symptoms right off the bat.
Okay, it's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
It's great information. Now, what about, so if you're married or you're in a relationship, how do you address, what's your recommendation? Because you mentioned you're going to have some other impacts, perhaps to your sex drive and your desires. So how do you share what's happening and be able to not negate, but continue to be sexually active and enjoying sex while you're going through these changes?
Right. So the sex drive can start declining in the 40s as you start having these sex hormone changes. So sex hormones are what I call necessary but not sufficient for an adequate sex drive. So you've got to get your estrogen, progesterone, testosterone, your 3 sex hormones in the right ranges to have a good sex drive. But for a lot of women, that's not enough. And so why isn't it enough is because there's another hormone that they may not know about called cortisol that absolutely is the kill switch on your libido. And your cortisol is your stress hormone. It's made by the adrenal glands that sit back on top of your kidneys. And your cortisol regulates your sleep-wake cycle, your weight, your energy level. It regulates your immune system, whether you get sick or not, whether you get cancer or not. And it has everything to do with your sex drive. So if you've gotten your sex hormones in the right range and you still don't have a sex drive, the next place you need to look is at your cortisol, because most likely there's a problem there. And there are herbals that will help with that. And ultimately you want to find out why your cortisol is not where it's supposed to be to get it in balance. But most women, once you get the sex hormones in balance and the stress hormone in balance, their sex drive will continue, will come back. It's very normal to have a high sex drive even into your 60s, 70s, and 80s. And actually, the sex drive going down is one of the key indicators, not only that you have a sex hormone imbalance, but also that you have a cortisol problem, because it's a measure of your vitality and your aliveness. That's what gives us our libido and our feminine fire.
That's beautifully said. Now let's talk a little bit more about that, because the aging process, and I don't know the audience how old you are, you listening to this, but I have to tell you, again, I'm 42. The aging process is fascinating. And, when you do take that outside look and you're looking into how you're changing, how you're improving, but also as a woman and in the media and everything is talked about, right? Our vitality, our sex appeal, and it's associated with youth. And one of the mental, right, emotional factors that start telling us like, hey, we're past our prime, I have air quotes here, or, our youth is behind us, is when we're no longer able to have children. And obviously and we're going through the process of becoming premenopausal and so on and so forth. So do you have recommendation on the emotional aspect of going through this process?
Yes, I would say that that's a lie. We are not past our prime. In fact, menopause can be the best time of your life. And this is why I'm emphatic about teaching women about how to be a menopause boss. And I talk about 4 steps to being a menopause boss. I have a free mini course. I have lots of YouTube videos on my YouTube channel that's under my name, Kieran Dunstan, MD. And really, it's all about your perception. If you believe that as you age, you're going to become tired, have no sex drive, dried up, and just lose your vitality and become sick, then guess what? You get to be right. That's what's going to happen. But if you believe that you can be healthy, vital, alive, sexy, and dynamic into your latter years, into the 60s, 70s, 80s, then you can do that. Because truth is, if you look around, there are plenty of women in the latter age ranges who are as vital, if not more vital and alive and sexy than they were in their younger years. But there are also women who are exactly the opposite. So what makes the difference? And I propose that a lot of it has to do with your belief, because your belief guides what you will do or not do, the actions you'll take or not take. And if you believe that it's a given that you should be healthy, vital, and alive, then when you start not feeling that way, you'll say, wait a minute, this isn't normal, and you'll do something about it. Whereas if you think it's normal and you go to your doctor and they say it's quote unquote normal for your age, which many doctors do, you just take it as a given that I'm just going to start falling apart. This is the beginning of the end. And then you are going to have this slow descent into the grave, but it doesn't have to be that way. If you're listening, just know that you can make a different choice for yourself.
Absolutely. So very well said. And I have heard that because I've 24 years in the Marine Corps, so obviously everything that I've done is catching up. And one of the things that doctors love to say now, it's like, well, at your age now, this is normal. And it's like, no, I don't want to accept that as being normal, because it's a really crappy normal. There has to be alternatives. There has to be ways. And for sure, the science and research has caught up to saying there are other ways. Although I would still say when it comes to the health of a woman or a woman's well-being, the science still needs to do a lot more catching up to make sure that we are properly educated. So I love what you do. I listened to a few of the episodes that you have on your podcast, and I absolutely love it, because what you promote and what you endorse and when you encourage women how to take care of themselves and the natural ways of doing that, much needed. And I just love it.
Okay.
So what else am I missing that women should be aware that I don't even know yet is going to come across my way?
Right. So a couple things. So one is, and I think we've touched on this a little bit, that menopause, even though the definition is an event, that how it shows up in your life is really a process, not an event. So the changes are going to start in your 40s and go all the way on up to your 80s. And it's kind of like a year by year, month by month, week by week transition. So you kind of need to be navigating your way through this all the way. It's not like you get to menopause, you decide what you're going to do about it, you've set it, and then it stays the same forever. It's really a navigation, because your body is going to need different things at different times. And I don't mean to sound vague about this, but the main point is that you've got to navigate. It's a journey. It's a journey. So menopause is a journey. We've talked a little bit about the fact that sex hormones aren't just for sex. So deficiencies in your sex hormones don't just affect your reproduction and your sexuality, but they affect all the systems in your body. It affects your eyes and how your eyes function. It affects your bones and how your bones function, and osteoporosis. It affects your heart and whether you get heart disease or not. It affects all of your cells. So you need to be aware of that. So one is, if you're having symptoms, you want to take care of that so that your quality of life is as good as it can be. But two, what you need to understand is that even if you're not having symptoms, I talk to some women who say, oh, I just stopped having periods one day. I don't have any symptoms. I'm fine. And what I want to say to them is, you may feel fine, but your cells may not be okay. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to have negative effects from the lack of sex hormones, whether you feel it or not. And so this is why you really want to arm yourself with knowledge and know what do you need to do to protect yourself so that you're not getting osteoporosis or heart disease or any of the other sequelae that can happen in your body, because it's not just about sex.
So can you just go see your gynecologist or your doctor and say, please, can you test all my levels of sex hormones?
Well, that's a great question. So I'm a board certified OBGYN for over 20 years. And unfortunately, there's no standard of care for actually checking sex hormones in women, which is kind of ridiculous because we check everything in medicine. We check your potassium level, your blood pressure, your magnesium, your cholesterol. Why do we not check your sex hormones? But there is no standard of care for it. And actually, the college that offers my board certification, American College of Obstetricians and Gynecologists, official statement on hormone replacement is basically, in women, you should do what they want. So this is why I have additional certification in functional medicine, and I use salivary and urine hormone testing, and we look at the levels. So you'll need that type of physician to look at your levels. So blood is not really accurate when it comes to checking hormone levels. So you need to look in the saliva or urine, and you need to get them evaluated. So your regular gynecologist is really trained like I was trained, and that is symptom drug, right? So they're going to either give you birth control pills or conventional hormone replacement therapy, which is typically Premarin, which is horse estrogen, and Provera, which is not progesterone like your body naturally has. It's a synthetic form that they've actually chemically altered. And so there was a big study done, the Women's Health Initiative study done several years ago, that showed that this standard treatment that we were giving was actually causing breast cancer and not improving heart disease and contributing to Alzheimer's and all of this. So that's when the college basically said, well, just do what patients want. But in functional medicine, we have a really different and what I consider a higher standard of care, where we actually check your hormone levels, and then we use what are called biologically identical hormones if you need replacement. So we use what's your body's natural estrogens and your body's natural progesterones and testosterones, and we give them to you to replace them.
Awesome. Wow. I'm sorry. I just keep I'm listening and I just keep absorbing, and I'm sure the listeners are probably feeling the same you're so well versed and educated on this. It's your area expertise. So I have you on the show, but it's a lot to take in. And as you're talking, I'm thinking, okay, I have not been at all taking care of myself, or I know that my journey has begun. And I know it's happening, but it's one of those, it's easier to ignore it than to deal with it. Not the right answer.
Well, it may seem that way, but I always tell people, if you listen to the pebbles, then you don't have to get the boulder. It's just like if there's a leak in your bathroom and you ignore it, and then you come home and the whole house is flooded because you didn't pay attention to the drips in the bathroom, then really it wasn't a great idea. But it is very much, a lot of us in our country are not always proactive. So you're not alone in this. I've been there too. We're not always proactive about listening. So when you have dis-ease in the body or symptoms, it's a sign that something's off. And so really knowing your body really well, and knowing when something's off, and then getting some sage advice on what's going on and how do you listen to and interpret the language of the body, by someone who practices a holistic integrative type of medicine is really vital and really will save you a lot of heartache down the line, so you don't have to get the boulders. You know, when my health was so offline, I got where I weighed 243 pounds. I had chronic fatigue, fibromyalgia, depression, anxiety. My hair was falling out. I had no sex drive. I basically worked and slept, and I was miserable. And this is before I discovered the type of medicine that I practice now. And all of the tools that I had been taught to use as a board certified OBGYN couldn't figure out what was wrong with me and couldn't fix it. And I'd go to my internist and she'd run tests and she'd say, oh, they're all quote unquote normal. You're fine. And I'd say, I'm so clearly not fine.
Yeah.
But I didn't know what else to do. And it wasn't until I discovered functional medicine that I learned how to address the root causes of what was making me sick. So I looked at hormone imbalances, discovered I had a cortisol problem. I had a flatline cortisol. I also had a progesterone deficiency. And even though I had checked my thyroid no less than 10 times conventionally, and it was quote unquote normal, when I checked it with the right tests that we use in functional medicine and read them the right way, I was hypo or low thyroid. And then I did a bunch of other tests that we use in functional medicine, and I had all kinds of health issues that were not diagnosed under a traditional medical model. So learning how to listen to what your body's telling you and interpret it is so vital.
Well, I am walking away from this interview with a reminder to continue to do that and to take it very seriously. And if you can share with us your link to your website and your videos and where I can go get that list, that the herbal herbs that you mentioned,
right?
That would be fabulous for me and for everyone listening to go have a look at all the content and the information that you have. And then if they want to further contact you, how they would go about doing that.
Sure. Well, they can check out my website, which is my name. It's spelled a little funny. So it's Kyrrin, and then Dunston, Dunston, and then MD for medicaldoctor.com. On my website, there are resources. They can find links to my podcast, Her Brilliant Health Radio, and then there are also links to my YouTube videos. And then there's also a link to the full script formulary that I talked about, where they can access the progesterone and herbal products.
Awesome. Thank you so much for all this great information. Anything else that you'd like to say before we end the show?
I just want to reiterate that I know it can seem confusing and a little overwhelming at first, but really it is pretty simple to navigate yourself to health and vitality and being a menopause boss at this time of your life. You just need to find someone you trust who understands it and can help you understand it, so that you are empowered to make decisions that are going to serve you in being that menopause boss. It is possible, it's doable. And I know that if you're listening, you can do this.
Thank you so much. And I really appreciate you being on the show. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. I know I got so much information out of it. It was actually recorded back in December. And I remember when I recorded it, as I was listening to Dr. Kyrrin Dunston, I was just blown away by the amazing content she was passing along. So having a re-listen in order to edit the episode reminded me of all the things I need to do so I do become a menopause boss and I take the very best care of myself that I can, which is why I wanted to do this episode so you too can do the same as you're entering menopause for the first time. Now, as always, a little reminder, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to the show. While you're there, leave a review. And until we meet again, get busy having first times and new experiences.
You've been listening to the 365 Firsts podcast. Hope you've gotten inspired to start your journey of first times and new experiences. Join the 365 Firsts Challenge by downloading the app at your local app store. Check out Next Level Firsts Coaching for additional assistance. Contact us if you want to share the stories of your latest firsts on the show. Now, go get busy having new experiences.